Everybody's coming in and up and down.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, everybody's still coming in and sitting down.
All right, cool. Hi, everyone.
Okay. Oops. There we go.
You know, I used to go to St. Clements. Oh, did you just make my head bigger like that?
All right.
That's better. Can you hear me now? Good. All right. We are going to go ahead and get started. Looks like we have a couple of empty seats in the aisles. If as things go on, it gets crowded, you guys could scoot in and act like you like each other to create seats for latecomers. We appreciate it. My name is Brian Short, and on behalf of the Theology on Tap Planning Committee and the St. Clement Young Adult Community, I would like to welcome you to the final Summer 2014 Theology on Tap. Woo! As we begin all things at St. Clement, I invite you to bow your head for a short prayer as we start to sing. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Good and gracious God, thank you for this and every day. As we continue with the summer's Theology on Tap, help us to open our hearts and minds to learn more about our Catholic faith. As we learn more about our faith, inspire us to live it out more fully each day. On this night, bless Father Jim as he gives his talk. May his talk be an opportunity for us all to better understand the relationship between, well, that was last week's topic, and to bring this richer understanding into our daily conversations and decisions. We ask this through your Son, our Lord, Jesus Christ. Amen. Just call it an audible. Few quick announcements. Restrooms, ladies and actually gentlemen, they're both out right by the stairs when you came in. Women, you go out and it's going to be on your left. Guys, there's a family restroom that has a paper sign marked men's.
No, you gotta. There you go.
And let's see here. Deposit any trash or recycling into the trash cans located around the room or cafeteria. Would be much appreciated. The cleanup crew would very much appreciate that. If any of you guys haven't been here all summer, those of us wearing green shirts, or in my case, nightgowns, we're the volunteers. Ask us if you need anything or have any questions. There will be a Q&A session tonight. It's going to be a little bit different. You're not going to get a big intermission. You're going to get note cards. You'll get to stand and stretch, and you're going to sit right back down since we got Father Joe on Skype. We want to keep things rolling and make sure he can get on his way tonight. So, without further ado, we're going to introduce our distinguished guest. Reverend James Martin is a Jesuit priest, culture editor of America Magazine, and author of numerous books, including My Life with the Saints, which Publishers Weekly named one of the best books of 2006. Father Jim is a frequent commentator in the national and international media, having appeared in such diverse outlets as the Colbert Report, Fresh Air, I know, right? The O'Reilly Factor, News Hour with Jim Lehrer, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, the History Channel, BBC, and Vatican Radio. Father Jim, am I forgetting anything?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Before entering the Jesuits in 1988, he graduated from the Wharton School of Business. Please join me in welcoming Father Jim.
Thanks so much. Thanks for turning out for a Skype talk. I may never travel anywhere ever again. I'm going to say I'm happy to be back at St. Clement's. I studied philosophy as part of my Jesuit training at Loyola University, which I'm sure some of you know about. And I used to go to St. Clement's for Mass. I just love the place. And frankly, whenever anyone asks me where to go to, don't tell anyone in other parishes this, but whenever anyone asks me where to go in Chicago, if they're moving to Chicago, I say either Madonna della Strada or St. Clements. So it's nice to be back and to pay back a little bit. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, good. I can hear you too, which is pretty cool. So greetings from New York, and I just want to want to talk a little bit about Jesus tonight, and I'll talk for about I have a 6-hour talk, and then we could. I thought I'd talk just for a little bit, about a half an hour or so, and talk about eating Jesus. And I have some papers in front of me, which is why I look down. I'm not checking my email, just so you know. And I hope you're not either. So I want to start with a story that spans several decades, and it shows why it sometimes takes a long time for people, including me, to get some of the stories in the Gospels. The first chapter happened when I was a Jesuit novice about 25 years ago. During the first month in the novitiate, I read a book that talked about a place called the Bay of Parables. And while I can't remember what book this was, I remember the really vivid impression that it made on me. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus finds himself so hemmed in by the crowds that he climbs aboard a boat and asks Peter to row out into the Sea of Galilee so he can preach from the shore, or preach from the water. The Gospel of Mark and Matthew also report similar incidents of Jesus' preaching from a boat. In Galilee, said this book that I read, there is still a place known as the Bay of Parables, where that gospel passage most likely happened. Near the shoreline is, said the book, a kind of naturally occurring amphitheater, kind of like half a bowl, where people would have been able to sit comfortably and listen to Jesus, like as if they were in a stadium or something. Moreover, said this book, the unique acoustics of the site made it the perfect place to hear Jesus. So the idea that you could really identify where a particular scripture story happened really captivated me. I remember thinking, that is so cool, to use some theological language. But, it really sort of confused me. I thought, why does Jesus get up into a boat to preach? It really didn't make any sense. Why didn't he just stand on the shoreline? So because of its kind of oddness, the story of the Bay of Parables. So I'm, at this point I'm like 27 years old and I'm in the novitiate, and it just stuck with me. Like, what's he doing? Why is he getting into a boat? Second chapter of my story. About 10 years later, I was on a summer vacation at a Jesuit house outside of Boston on in a town called Cohasset. And anyone from Boston in the room right now? No, all from Chicagoland. So. Anyway, Cohasset is on a bay that empties into the Atlantic Ocean. So one day, couple Jesuits and I are sitting on the lawn overlooking the harbor, or the harbor, as they say in Boston. And we heard this noise. It was a commotion, and it turned out to be from a sailing school for these kids, these like adolescents. And they were like a mile away. And to my surprise, we could hear them talking as if they were only a few feet away. I could hear the kids saying like, "Oh, I can't fix my rudder. Help me! My boat. I can't fix the sail." It was like they were literally 10 feet away. It was the strangest thing. So I said to one of the older Jesuits there how crazy it was that we could hear these kids, a mile, maybe 2 miles away in the harbor. And he said, well, Jim, he said, sound carries more easily over water. That's why you can hear them. And he said, you remember the story about Jesus preaching from the boat? He said, that's one reason he probably did it that way. It was easier for the crowds to hear him, right? So that insight really delighted me. It reminded me that, sometimes that what we don't get in the gospel passages often turn out to have a real-life explanation once we think about the historical context of those stories. So finally, a third chapter. 3 years ago, I took a pilgrimage to the Holy Land as part of my research for this new book I've done called Jesus a Pilgrimage, which makes the perfect gift for your friends and family. And I hope it's on sale. And I was there for about 2 weeks, mainly in Galilee, which is up north, and in Jerusalem down south, with a very good Jesuit friend of mine named George. So anyway, George and I arrived in Jerusalem about 10 years after my encounter with the noisy sailing school, and about 25 years after my first reading of the story about the Bay of Parables. So this is a totally true story. So at dinner on the very first night, we're in the Jesuit community in Jerusalem at a place called the Pontifical Biblical Institute. And I asked this Vietnamese Jesuit, whose name is Father Duan, this Vietnamese Jesuit named Father Duan says to us, "What place would you most like to visit in all the Holy Land?" And I said, "Well, that's easy, the Bay of Parables." And he says, "The what?" Now, this guy is a scripture scholar, and he was living in the Holy Land for like 10 years. So he said, "I've never heard of it." And I said, "Oh, all right, well, maybe it's the one place, this guy hasn't heard of." So a few days later, George and I make the 4-hour drive from Galilee, from Jerusalem up to Galilee, and we're in this Franciscan hostel right on the Mount of the Beatitudes, right on the Sea of Galilee. I mean, it's right there. It's like right there on the Sea of Galilee. After we settled ourselves in our rooms, the Franciscan sister in charge said to us, "So, Jim and George, what would you most like to see?" And I say, "The Bay of Parables." And she says, "The what?" Now, we're right on the Sea of Galilee. And she just shook her head and kind of shrugged as if I were kind of deluded or insane or both. So George rolled his eyes. My friend George is pretty funny. George rolled his eyes afterwards, and this is a quote. He said, "It's like you were talking about Santa's workshop in the North Pole." So a few hours later, we make our way to a place called Tabgha, which is right on the Sea of Galilee. And it's the traditional site of the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. And there's this beautiful Benedictine chapel there. So afterwards in the gift shop, I noticed one of the Benedictine monks who lived there, obviously. And I said to George, "I'm gonna go ask him something." And he says, "If you ask him about the Bay of Parables, I'm leaving." So I go up to him and I say, he's German. I don't speak any German. And I say, "Bitte," my one word of German. "Do you know where the Bay of Parables is?" And I can see my friend like this, looking at the gift shop cards and stuff. And I fully expected him to say, "The what?" And instead he says, "Oh, yeah, the Bay of Parables. Yeah, I know the Bay of Parables." He said, "Yeah, it's very close to here." So he stumbled a bit. And believe it or not, it's a true story. My friend George speaks fluent German, and it's nice to have smart Jesuit friends. And so I call him over and I say, "Help me translate this." So the guy, so George is looking at him and he's looking at me, and then he's, how it is when you translate. And so the guy says something, and then George says, "Walk along the road." And the guy talks. He says, "And you'll see an opening in the bushes." And then George listens to the guy, and the guy says it again. And George said, I think he said to follow stones that were painted purple. And the Benedictine monk goes, yeah, the rocks, they are violet colored. They're violet rocks. So, it's a true story. So, under the blistering hot sun, it was about 1,000 degrees out in August. George and I followed this little map. I think I still have it, actually. I have it in my bookcase. George and I follow this map that the Benedictine monk draws for us. And sure enough, we almost trip over these big boulders spray-painted violet. And George looks at him and he goes, "The violet rocks." And immediately, the ground drops away from us, and we find ourselves on the rim of a naturally occurring amphitheater. People had likely stood right where we were and listened to Jesus preaching from the boat. Or as they often say in the Holy Land, If it didn't happen here, then it happened 100 yards away from here. You know, as I looked at the water sparkling under the sun, I could easily picture Jesus sitting on that boat, preaching, us hearing it, the sound carrying over the water. And George looked at me and said, "It's a bay of parables." Then I saw something that amazed me even more. This is totally true. All around us was this. Rocky ground. All around us. Rocky ground, fertile ground, stony ground, even a big thorn bush. Does that sound familiar to everybody? You know? And I could find this on my cell phone. I got some photos of this I could probably show you. But it'll probably take me about a year. So we saw all these things. I'm going to see if I can find it. Hold on. It's like wonder of technology. So we saw all these things right around us. And it wasn't like, all right, hold on, I'm getting there. See how this works. So, look. Hold on. Hold on. It's coming. It's coming. Yeah, you're going to laugh. So, here are the stones painted purple. And here's the Bay of Parables. And all around us was rocks. Look at that. Thorns. See that? So, rocky ground, stony ground, and a thorn bush. Does that sounds familiar to you, right? Yeah. In the parable of the sower, Jesus tells the story of the farmer who goes out to sow. And you know the story, the seed falls on different kinds of grounds. Rocky ground represents those who hear the word, but don't allow it to take root. Thorny ground is an image of people who let the cares of the world choke off things. And fertile ground represents those who hear the word and accept it. As we stood under the broiling sun, I was amazed to see rocks and thorny ground and fertile ground. No one had arranged it. There was no one there, by the way. There was no one near where we were, right? It wasn't like they had carted in topsoil for fertile ground or planted thorn bushes, right, or brought in rocks to make it look like it did in Jesus' time, right, as if we were in a theme park called Jesus Land, right? It was just there. It was just there. And it dawned on me that when Jesus used images and objects from nature to convey his message, seeds, rocks, birds, water, he was probably not talking about generalities to the people of his time, but things right here. Not think about rocky ground in general, but look at that rocky ground right there that you're standing on, right? Not those people are like thorns, but those people are like those thorns. It grounded the Gospels in a way that I could have never imagined and reminded me once again that Jesus, the Son of God, is fully human and fully divine. Okay? Fully human and fully divine. Now, what does that mean? Let's start with fully human for a bit. To begin with, Jesus of Nazareth, the person who walked the same places where we were walking, wasn't God pretending to be a human being. He was a flesh and blood human being. He was born, he lived, he died, like any human being. The child who was called Yeshua entered the world as helpless as any newborn and just as dependent on his parents, right? He was nursed, held, fed, burped, and changed. Although I don't want to think about what diapers were like in first century Palestine. Right? He had a body like yours and mine, which meant he ate and he drank and he slept. He experienced sexual longings and urges, right? He felt joy and sadness. He grew weary at the end of the day, right? He pulled muscles. He felt sick to his stomach. He threw up. I always like to tell people that. Jesus threw up. I mean, it sounds crazy, and we're kind of like, well, what's that have to do with anything? It has a lot to do with everything because it means that he had a body, right? Just like us. He had headaches. He skinned his knees, right? Everything proper to the human being except sin Jesus experienced, right? Now, Jesus' humanity is a real stumbling block for a lot of people. Maybe even people in this room, where you're sitting. Gospel stories that show him displaying intense emotions can really unsettle people who want to focus on his divinity. So like in the Gospel of Mark, one of my favorite stories, because it's so provocative, is a non-Jewish woman, often called the Syrophoenician woman or the Canaanite woman, comes to Jesus and asks him to heal her daughter who is ill. And he says, quote, this is a quote from Jesus, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Right? That's a stinging rebuke, no matter what the context. When the woman responds that even the dogs get crumbs from the table, Jesus changes and heals her daughter. Now, why does he speak so sharply? Is he testing her faith? If so, it's a pretty harsh way of doing it, right? Is he uncomfortable is he uncomfortable being asked to perform a miracle in a non-Jewish region, right? It's still a very harsh thing for him to say. Perhaps, however, Jesus needed to learn something from the woman's persistence, that his ministry extended to non-Jews as well. Or maybe he was just tired. You ever think of that? A few lines earlier in Mark, it says, he entered a house and did not want to know anyone he was there, right? So whatever reason, and we'll never know for sure until we, until we get to heaven, we pray we'll get to heaven and be able to ask Jesus all these questions. Either he's learning or he's tired. That episode shows Jesus' full humanity on display. He's a human being. But there's another part of the story, a healing. Jesus says to the woman, for saying that, you may go, the demon has left your daughter. She returns home and finds the daughter cured, right? Fully human and fully divine doesn't mean that Jesus was just a great guy, an inspiring teacher, a holy man, right? He was God. At one point on the way to Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, who do people say that I am? You know that story, right? And they say, some say Elijah, others say John the Baptist come to life, others one of the prophets like Jeremiah. And Peter says, you are the Messiah, right? But Jesus is a lot more than even that. At the time, the Messiah wasn't really expected to be divine, right? Jesus is even more than Peter and the disciples understand at that time. He performs astonishing deeds, what the gospel writers call in the synoptics miracles, or works of power, or in the Gospel of John, signs, right? Today we are called them miracles. Healing the sick, calming storms, raising people from the dead. Time and again the Gospels report that the disciples are amazed or astonished. One of my favorite understated lines is after Jesus heals a paralyzed man, the paralytic in the Gospel of Mark, the disciples say, we have never seen anything like this. I want to say, yeah, no kidding. But if his humanity is a stumbling block for many, his divinity is even more so. For a rational modern mind, talk about miracles and the resurrection can be disturbing or even an embarrassment. Despite the proportion of gospel stories that focus on the miracles, so much of the gospels focus on the miracles, people want to confine his identity to just, a wise teacher. They say, I don't believe that he's the Son of God or divine. I just like to follow Jesus because he's a good guy. Thomas Jefferson went so far as to create his own gospel. I don't know if you know this, but he actually scissored out parts of the gospels that he didn't like and kind of pasted them together. Made his own gospel, right? He wanted a Jesus who didn't threaten him. He wanted a Jesus who he could tame, right? But divinity and humanity are both part of Jesus' story. If we leave one or the other out, we're not talking about Jesus anymore. It's our own creation. In fact, there was a scripture scholar, E.P. Sanders, and he read Thomas Jefferson's book, and he wanted to see what kind of Jesus it was, who Jefferson had kind of created. And he said, in the end, it's very much like Thomas Jefferson, right? So much of this division, I think, between those who want a human Jesus and those who want a divine Jesus can be seen in two kinds of approaches today. People who prefer what's called the Jesus of history and the Christ, and people who prefer the Christ of faith. Now, in historical Jesus studies, scholars of the Jesus of history try to explain as much as we can know about the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth, right? So they talk about customs in first century Palestine, what it was like to live under Roman rule, what a carpenter would have done at the time. And that such research helps us understand him in the context of his times, right? So, for example, you know the story about the talent? Remember the master who gives his servant 5 talents, 3 talents, 1 talent? Well, if you know that a talent is a huge amount of money, it's 15 years' wages, for a day labor. It's huge. So if a guy gets 5 talents, that's 75 years of wages. You get a better understanding of why he's using that word, right? You have to understand the context of his times. So that's what historical Jesus studies are about. It's understanding Jesus in the context of his times. And that's often called a Christology from below. understanding Jesus first as a human being, guy who walked, in first century Nazareth and Judea. But there are just as many scholars and theologians who focus less on the details of his time on earth and more on his place in the Christian faith. These people consider how the resurrection, the miracles, how Christ saves us. They focus on the divinity of Christ and start with what's called the Christ of faith. This is called a Christology from above. Here the starting point is Jesus as the Son of God. The difference between these two approaches can be shown with a brief example. Let's talk about the story of Lazarus, which you all know. So in the Gospel of John, right, the brother of Jesus' friends, Mary and Martha, whom the Gospels say Jesus loved Mary and Martha. There's a little insight for us to begin with. Jesus wasn't sort of like this person set apart. He had friends. He loved them, right? They tell him that Lazarus is sick. And by the way, do you know how they tell him that? They don't say Lazarus of Bethany is sick. They don't say our brother Lazarus is sick. They don't even say your friend Lazarus is sick. You know what they say in the Greek? The Greek is hon philes, he whom you love. Isn't that beautiful? He whom you love is ill. It really shows Jesus, really had intimate friends. He hears the news. He waits 2 days, very confusing to the disciples. He meets with the two sisters who, in a sense, I think it's either scolding or anger or trust or faith, say, if you had been here, our brother would not have died. There's two different ways of reading that. Faith, if you had been here, our brother would not have died. Or if you had been here, our brother would not have died. Imagine someone who is sick and asking a doctor friend of yours to come, and he comes 2 days later. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus asked for the stone to be rolled away. He weeps first. Humanity, right? He weeps first, and Lazarus is raised from the dead. Now, a historical Jesus scholar would ask questions like, what were Jewish burial practices at the time? Why did Jesus wait? Was there significance? Did any customs prevent him from going to the tomb? What was the role of women in Jewish burial rites, right? Did any Jewish traditions of the time incorporate the idea of the resurrection? So answers to those questions help us understand what Jesus is doing and saying. Someone starting from the vantage point of the Christ of faith would ask other questions. What does the raising of Lazarus tell us about Jesus' divine power? How does the idea of Jesus as life show itself in this story, right? What does it say about Jesus' own resurrection? And a spiritual writer would say, what does the story of Lazarus say to us about how Jesus calls us to new life, right? Here's the point. Both sets of questions are important. Both sets of questions are important. If we lose sight of either perspective, we risk turning Jesus either into a man pretending to be God or God pretending to be a man. The two approaches are complementary, not contradictory. Unfortunately, there are books that really set aside one or the other. If you read historical Jesus books, some of them, they'll say, well, when it comes to the miracles, we can't talk about that. That's about faith. We're not going to talk about the resurrection. But just as often you read books that are on the Christ of faith, that are spirituality books, right? Or books about theology that say, well, we're not going to treat mere historical matters. That's not important, really. We really can't know those things. But you have to see both Jesus as fully human and fully divine. And by the way, he's not just fully human in one event and fully divine in another. It might seem to us like when he's in Nazareth, right, he's fully human. And then when he starts his public ministry and he raises people from the dead and he's stilling the storms and he's healing the sick, he's divine. No, he's always fully human and fully divine. I mean, it's a mystery. It's a hard mystery to understand. But I like to tell people that he is divine when he is sawing a piece of wood, and he's human when he's raising Lazarus from the dead. He's always both and. It's mysterious for us, but it's a beautiful mystery. Now, one brief thing, I want to talk a little bit before I open the floor to questions about Nazareth. It really helps us understand who he was. How many people are in that room tonight, roughly? What do you think? 100?
No.
More? How many?
220.
220. Wow. I'm definitely not going anywhere anymore. I'm gonna. Well, guess what? look around you. Look around you. This is as big as Nazareth was. 200 to 400 people. You're in Nazareth. You know, it was small. It was a tiny town. There are many towns mentioned in the Talmud and the Old Testament. Nazareth is not one of them. It was a backwater in a backwater part of the Holy Land, right? It's a joke in the Gospel of John when Nathanael hears that Jesus is from Nazareth. He says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Right? It was very, it was very poor, right? Jesus grew up in a largely agrarian, tiny little hamlet, right? He was a carpenter. The word actually used in the Greek is tekton, which is really beautiful. That probably meant more like handyman, woodworker, even day laborer, right? So he's living in a very small town. That's why when he stands up and he starts preaching, people say, you know, who is this? Is this not the carpenter, right? They know him, right? He's from a tiny town. He lives a very simple life, right? He works hard. I mean, we tend to forget from ages 12 to 30, that's 18 years, he's working as a carpenter, okay? Now, an hour and a half away from Nazareth is a town called Sepphoris. Raise your hands if you've heard of Sepphoris. Raise your hands. Okay, one or two people. Actually, that's good because I like to tell this story. Sepphoris, Sepphoris, was a large town, right, of about 40,000 people being rebuilt by Herod at the time. We know this from archaeology, right? It's an hour and a half away. It was being rebuilt at the time that Jesus, the carpenter, was in Nazareth, right? Does it make sense to you that a carpenter from Nazareth, an adult looking for work, might go to a town that's being rebuilt an hour and a half away? Of course. You know, people would have easily traversed those distances in the time. And you might say, so what? Well, guess what? In Sepphoris, there were really elaborate and lavish houses with mosaics and frescoes. Jesus would have seen these places. Okay? Most likely, Jesus would have seen these places, maybe even worked on these places. He would have at an early age been exposed to income disparities. So he works in beautiful Sepphoris, then he goes back to crummy Nazareth, right? Which had, you know, tiny little houses and hovels, you know, and sewage kind of thrown everywhere, right? He would have been living in a very small, probably one-room house with his family, maybe his extended family. He would have seen income disparities. So it's important to think of Jesus, you know, looking at the poor and kind of coming to understand, you know, the difficulties of the poor, not simply through divine inspiration, but through human experience, you know? So we have to remember these two things kind of operating within him, you know? The human experience of living a human life, of being a human person, and, of course, divine inspiration, you know, beyond what we can imagine as human beings. So what I'm trying to do in this book, which makes the perfect gift for your friends and family, is really remind people of his full humanity and his full divinity, you know, and remind us, you know, that we need to sort of look at both these things together always. It's a mystery, of course, but, you know, while it is a mystery and we'll never fully understand it, it really is the most beautiful mystery I know and well worth pondering. So thank you very much. Thanks. So I got plenty of time for questions. And just, I don't know how we can do it. Maybe come up to the mic or the monitor or something, and I can answer your questions. So about anything at all.
Okay, all right, Father Jim, we're going to have you hang tight for a second. Christina, do you want to do index cards? Yeah. Okay, all right, so here, can you hear me, Father Jim?
I can, yeah.
All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to pass out index cards in the room.
Oh, okay.
We'll stand and stretch, and then we'll consolidate so we don't have any duplicates.
Okay, meanwhile, while you're talking, here's a stone from the Sea of Galilee.
All right, so we have, if you, volunteers with index cards, if you can raise them up, hold them up high, take a look around, folks. If you have a question for Father Jim, find one of these people or they'll come to you. You guys write those down and then give them back to somebody in the green shirt.
Sea of Galilee.
All right, and then what we are going to do is, if you in one corner, we're going to have a, Father Jim, we're going to plug the book that makes a perfect gift for your friends and family.
Awesome.
Hi, so my name's Kim, and I run the Young Adult Book Discussion Group here at St. Clement.
Yay.
And so this fall, our first book is actually Jesus of Pilgrimage.
Oh, good choice.
So we are starting out a series of books. Actually, Father Discoff makes a great introduction. Where we're starting with Jesus of Pilgrimage, and then we are going to read Killing Jesus and Zealot.
Wow.
Which are
It's like
books.
Jesus,
Yes.
the Jesus Book Club.
This fall.
You're going to
So
read Gospel too?
Yes, we are reading Gospel in December.
Good idea.
So, I don't remember which one I picked for the Gospel. It's either Matthew or Mark. I don't know.
Okay.
But, so, some of these books can be a little challenging for us, so it's good to have a chance to be able to discuss them with fellow Catholics and fellow Christians, and being able to say, yes, we're looking at this historical perspective, but where is faith in these kind of books that other people might be writing either to challenge our faith or just as a historical perspective. So I'd like to welcome anyone to join. You don't have to let us know beforehand. We do encourage you to read the books before coming, or at least read part of the books. We meet here every third Wednesday of the month, and just love having new people join. It's a great opportunity to meet people either in St. Clement or from surrounding parishes, and just have a chance to kind of grow in our faith and with others around us. So that's all.
Great. I was going to say, book clubs are an amazing way to not only build community, but learn stuff and continue learning after college. I mentioned a lot of people right out of college, so yeah, great job. They're a lot of fun to run, so I'm all for book clubs.
All right, guys, at this point, we're going to have you just stand and stretch. Take 1 or 2 minutes most. We ask you to stay in the room so that we can keep things rolling tonight. If you have any questions, bring them to me or hand them to somebody who's reading the Father Jim will be right back with you.
Internet connection
Yeah,
problem.
great job.
The wireless plugged in as well.
All right, guys, if you could please make your way back to your seats. Green shirts, and you can round people up in the cafeteria, bring them back in here. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, Father Jim, can you hear me?
I can. I'm looking for that map. I think I still have that map.
Oh, yeah, let's find that map.
That's easier said than done. Hold on. Give me a few seconds. I can find it. A million things here. Maybe not. But go ahead with your questions.
All right, so ordinarily we let the speaker read the questions beforehand, but we're going to blindside you. So
Okay.
if you can match with Colbert, I think you can handle me, though. All right, you ready?
I think you're right. Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, go ahead. I can't find the map, but go ahead. Ready.
All right, here we go. In no particular order or in any subject continuity. Besides the Bible, what is your favorite book? specifically covering historical and or spiritual Jesus?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, that's what I use the most. Well, I'll show you.
While we're waiting, if anybody else has any other questions, just hands up. We'll get you cards and pens.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not wearing my black pants. I apologize. I'll tell you a funny story. I was doing a Skype talk out in Stanford University, and I forgot the time distance, and the talk was going to be at 7:30, and I thought, oh, that's not bad. I can do a talk at 7:30. Well, it's 3 hours difference, so it was 10:30. And I was super tired that night. It was in February, so I said, I'm not putting my suit on. I was really tired. So I got into my pajamas, and I put on my clerical shirt. And I had my pajama bottoms on. And I know. And I had to get up to get something, and I stood up, and they all started laughing. I was so embarrassed. So anyway. So here are the great books that I used. I used Gerhard Loefing's Jesus of Nazareth. Excellent. It's a great overview by a good scripture scholar. I also used the best commentary is the Sacra Pagina commentary. And it's really good. It's very accessible. And it goes through sort of, verse by verse, exegeting everything. I just loved it. I also used, for historical stuff, I used John Myers, Marginal Jew. These are just a few ones I used. But the other thing that one book I discovered that I really didn't know too much about this book, but it was really interesting. Now these are historical books. I would say historical. These two are both Christ of Faith and Jesus of History. This next one is purely historical. It's really good. It's called Excavating Jesus, and it's about all the archaeological finds and what Nazareth was like, what Sepphoris was like. They have a see if I can find it. They have a reconstruction of like what Capernaum would have looked like. Yeah, I know, really interesting stuff. What Sepphoris would have looked like. Here's and this is based on archaeology. So that's a room in Sepphoris. Nice, huh? Yeah, exactly. So, a lot of people really say, oh, we can't learn anything from history and blah, 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 and it's all irrelevant. That's baloney. So here's Capernaum, where Jesus was, and how do we know that? Well, they have archaeology, and they unearth things and they find out what the houses would have looked like and all that. So those are the books I think I use the most. If I would recommend a book, that you could read, also that's very good. This Jesus of Nazareth is very good by Gerhard Loefing. So I mean, at the end of the book, I have a whole list of kind of for further reading. These are, it was great to spend time with these books too, and just spend time with the Gospels. I mean, it was really, I loved it. I mean, I was glad when I finished the book because it was a big project, but to be able to open up these Bible commentaries and learn something, and it's just amazing. So anyway, so those are some ones that I recommend. That was an easy question.
All right, we're going to get easier then. I'll give you a couple softballs. The first is, do you have a Twitter account? If not, you should get one. If so, what's your handle?
Do I have a Twitter account? Wait a minute. Hold on. Yes, I do. And there it is. It's at James Martin SJ.
At James Martin SJ.
Yeah. That was easy.
All right.
That was really easy.
I'm just gearing up here. I'm going to give you two more softballs. All right. These are both New York related. I have one that says, do you regularly preach at any parish in New York City? If so, which one? And I am a young adult currently living in New York City. Do you recommend any particular parishes? I think there is something about in Manhattan.
Oh, okay. There's a young adult living in New York City there. Wow. You could have come. You could have come and just knocked on my door. Yes, I do. I've been helping out for the last 15 years, which I can't believe, at St. Ignatius Loyola, which is on 83rd and Park. They have a very good young adult program. So, young adult parishes in New York. So here we go. St. Ignatius Loyola on the Upper East Side. On the Upper West Side, Holy Trinity, Blessed Sacrament, and there's another one. Downtown, St. Joseph's in the Village, and St. Francis Xavier. Those are and St. Paul the Apostle on 59th Street. So depending where you are, they're all great. I would say go to St. Ignatius. I'm a little biased, you know.
All right, we'll move from New York City to the Holy Land. We have another two-parter. What was your favorite part of the Holy Land, and did you ever find out why nobody else seems to know about the Bay of Parables?
Yeah, it's so funny. A friend of mine said, well, maybe now they will know. Maybe there'll be all these signs for the Bay of Parables. Yeah, my favorite parts were, number one, the Sea of Galilee was amazing. I mean, I can't describe what it was like to see that and to say Jesus saw this. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. You know, I knew that it existed. By the way, here's a question. Everybody close your eyes. Close your eyes. Okay. Raise your hands if you think that the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee, and Lake Gennesaret are three different bodies of water. Raise your hands. Raise your hands if you think they're all three different bodies of water. Okay, put your hands down. Put your hands down. Okay, now open your eyes. Okay, so about half the people thought that. They are one body of water, which I had no idea. So I said to one of my friends before I left, I said, where's the Sea of Galilee on this map? He's like, right there where it says Sea of Tiberias. I was like, what, it's the same thing? But anyway, seeing it was incredible to me. And being at Capernaum, where Jesus' base of ministry was, the Holy Sepulchre was a very moving moment for me as well, because they know with almost 100% certainty that that is the location, you know, where he was crucified and rose from the dead. And then the pool of Bethesda, where he healed the paralyzed man, because they had thought that was they had thought up until recently that was mythical or allegorical, but they found it, you know, just as John described. Yeah, so those are my favorite parts. There was a second part to that question? Oh, why does no one know where the Bay of Parables? I don't know. And you know, funny enough, I bought a book in the Sea of Galilee, near the Sea of Galilee, and there it was. So I don't know. I mean, I was happy to find it, you know, by ourselves. And like I said, there was no one there when we were there that day. So maybe if you go back, there'll be more tourists there.
All right, you ready for me to get harder?
Yeah. They couldn't get any easier unless you asked me my phone number or something.
All right, here we go.
Uh-oh.
Okay, this question says, I read the op-ed section in the New York Times. There have been journalists who have no problem blasting the Catholic Church, usually in the op-ed section, which would be okay, but I can't answer or debate an article such as the recent editorial about nuns, if the article doesn't even have basic facts about the church correct. Have you seen any of these op-eds in the New York Times recently? And if so, how would you answer them?
Yeah, I mean, I see them all the time. You know, I read the Times every day. I also know a lot of the reporters on the Times. I think that, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, like, I think ignorant stuff that's said, not just in the New York Times, but just in the media in general. I think it's important to distinguish between ignorance, anti-Catholicism, and critiques. Right? So there's ignorance. I mean, people don't know the first thing about nuns or priests or religious orders or something like that. That's the first thing. And that kind of excuses. Then there's anti-Catholicism, which is, I think we have to be careful labeling things that are critical anti-Catholic. But there is some anti-Catholicism out there. And then there's, you know, critique. You know, frankly, the church has done a lot of stuff that deserves critique. You know, for example, the sex abuse crisis. You know, we deserve to be critiqued on that. So I do lament sometimes the tone of the op-ed pieces in the Times. And I agree with the question that a lot of times they're getting basic facts wrong. They just are. I mean, that's kind of inexcusable. Ironically, I mean, I've done a couple op-eds for the Times, and they do a lot of fact-checking, at least for their outside op-ed writers. You know, maybe their columnists don't have that same kind of fact-checking, but it does kind of baffle me sometimes. I don't think the Times is anti-Catholic. I don't think their reporters are. I mean, the reporters really work their butts off to get the story right. A lot of times, I mean, you know, working in the magazine, you see that a lot of times reporters say to me, we can't get our phone calls returned. So if they're trying to do a story on like a local bishop or something, he won't return their phone calls, and then they're stuck. So it's quite complicated.
Okay, on a related topic. Go ahead. Okay, on a related topic, you know, as it relates to the PR with the Times, what do you think is the church's biggest challenge in our society today?
Today? No question. Sex abuse. I mean, that's very simple. You know, on a more broad way of looking at it would be the gospel. You know, preaching the gospel is always is preached the right way. But that's kind of timeless. I would say today, in 2014, it is the sex abuse crisis, and that is we are still dealing with that, and it still gets in the way of our proclaiming the good news, and we still have a long way to go. So that is, to me, the biggest challenge right now.
What are things that religious and lay people can do to combat that issue?
To combat the difficulty of the message being heard during the sex abuse crisis, or to combat the sex abuse crisis?
To combat the issue perceived by those outside the church.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, I think that the most important thing that the church, I mean, you know, we're all the church, so I wouldn't want to just say lay people and clergy, but I mean, all of us together have to address this crisis and to address this problem, to make sure it doesn't happen again through safe environment programs. It's going to take a lot of hard work. To be compassionate, you know, when it comes to victims, and also I think to demand greater accountability. I think that's the missing piece, you know, among church leaders. So yeah, it's very difficult. I think to just keep working hard, and also to pray and to trust that the Holy Spirit is leading us through all this, and that we will move through this, you know, thanks to the Holy Spirit. You know, Jesus said, you know, He'll be with us till the end of time, and He's not abandoning us in this, but we really have to step up to the plate. Yeah, you're right. These are getting harder.
All right, we'll dial it back a little bit for part A, and then part B we'll get a little touchier. What made you decide to join the clergy after completing business school? And what economic policy would Jesus promote in the U.S. today? You're welcome.
Yeah, Jesus is all about earned income tax credit. I'm kidding. We're writing an editorial about that. What made me? Well, you know, the short answer is I went to the Wharton School of Business as an undergrad, and I really studied. Business is a real vocation for a lot of people. Probably a lot of people in this room. You know, fulfills a lot of people, and people you know, enjoy doing it. I really wasn't asked what I wanted to do, and sort of stepped on that treadmill without thinking a lot about it. And I worked right down the street at GE for a couple of years in New York during the 80s, before you guys were born. I was a yuppie, and I had a lot of money, and I was going out a lot, and, you know, I had a good time. It was fun in my early 20s living in New York. But, you know, as time wore on, I got more and more dissatisfied with the job, and I felt kind of trapped. And I didn't know what to do or where to go, or I was getting all these stress-related, like, stomach problems. And one night I turned on the TV and I saw a documentary about Thomas Merton, and that just really got me thinking. And that led me to the Jesuits. And I didn't do a whole lot of discernment, but it was a good decision. And it was really just, it was not only escaping, but it was kind of moving towards something that really seemed beautiful to me, religious life and the monastery. I mean, I didn't understand anything about religious orders. And when I met the Jesuits, something just clicked. Best decision I ever made. I mean, really, and I think I took more time deciding what kind of car to buy, you know. But it was a good decision, and yeah, and I went from a place of being totally dissatisfied to, like sort of pinching myself that, that I couldn't believe how life could be so fulfilling. So yeah, what was the second part of the question?
If Jesus were a policymaker, what kind of economic conscriptions would we have?
Yeah, well, I always try to avoid questions like that, but I would say, he's on the side of the poor. So I would say policies that help the poor. And he's always calling us. In Matthew 25, the litmus test of whether or not we're going to get into heaven is how we treat the least of our brothers and sisters. And I think that goes for society, too. And so Catholic social teaching is very strong on that. When decisions need to be made first with an eye towards how it will help the poor. And we're calling in solidarity with it. So, I think it's pretty clear. Now, there are questions about how best to help the poor, I think, and that I think you can have legitimate differences over that. But I think, if you're not interested in helping the poor, you're really not paying attention to the Gospels very carefully. He talks about the poor over and over and over again. And Jesus was poor himself. So, yeah, so anything that helps the poor and the disenfranchised.
Okay. If Jesus taking on a body gave him access to humanity, how does our membership in the body of Christ give us access to his divinity?
Okay, now they're getting hard. That's like a book. So God, here's how I would say it. God participates in our humanity in the fullest way possible, right? And Jesus invites us through his life, through his teachings, to participate in his life, which is a life of freedom and joy and eventually eternal life. So, he in a sense, he comes into our lives to invite us into his life. So it's a very mysterious thing, but, to be fully alive is to be alive with Christ and to be a Christian. And I think people know that because people in this room, I think, probably felt, before they really embraced their faith, a little dead, and this is not what Christ invites us to. There's the story of Lazarus again. He calls to us and says, come out, come forth, right, into life. So he's always inviting us into life. Every moment of the day, he's inviting us into new life and his life, which is divine and eternal and beautiful. So, yeah, it's a hard question to answer. I don't think we'll really understand that until we get to heaven. But, yeah, that's how I like to see it. And it's so beautiful when you think about, the way he was, the way he came to us, the most unassuming person. Carpentry was, by the way, very low status. He could have come as a king or a ruler. He didn't. He came as a carpenter in a crummy little town. I often like to tell people the image I like to think of is Jesus, if the Son of God were to come today, it would be as a refugee in a refugee camp. Marginalized and poor, and he comes to us in this very simple way so that we can understand him simply. So yeah, pretty great.
If the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit have always existed before time, before man, why did Jesus have to gradually learn the human experience if his knowledge is infinite?
Another hard, because you really are getting hard. All right, so so it's really not an if. So the Trinity exists before all time, as I understand it, as far as I know. Jesus' self-knowledge, I talk about that in the book a lot, is very complicated. So here's the question. Jesus was fully human, is fully human. So that means he has a human consciousness. What does that mean? Well, that means that he has to learn something before he can know it, right? That's a human consciousness. He's fully divine, too, which means he participates fully with the Father, which means he knows all things. See the difference? See the difficulty? So it's kind of confusing. There are some passages in the Gospels that show Jesus knowing everything. The Father and I are one. Bingo. It's pretty clear. He predicts his suffering and his resurrection. Okay, he knows when people are. The girl is not dead; she is asleep. You know, he knows these things. So there's a sense of his kind of divine knowledge. Other times he doesn't seem to know things. About the hour of the end of the world, only the Father knows, not the Son. That's in the Gospels. He says that some people will not die until he comes back. Well, that was wrong. Right? There are some things that he doesn't seem to know. The story that I mentioned in the Gospel of Mark, where he seems to need to learn something from a woman. Right? He changes his mind. I'm not going to heal your daughter. Now I'm going to heal your daughter. So what's going on? The way I like to think, well, first of all, it's a mystery. We will never understand how his divine knowledge participates with his human knowledge fully. I mean, we won't fully understand it. I like to think of Jesus as growing in his understanding of who he was. You know, being a little unsure about it, perhaps as an adolescent, understanding something dramatic at the baptism. At the wedding feast of Cana, remember, his mother has to convince him to do that miracle, remember? Mary may have understood his vocation more than he did earlier. So he gradually kind of grows in his knowledge of who he is. And that by the end, you know, at the crucifixion, the resurrection, he's fully kind of incorporated into his vocation, into who he is. That's how I like to see it. Jesus grows in his understanding. That's more about vocation. How the divine knowledge and the human knowledge work together, that's a very good question. And the Gospels are a little confusing on that. A little confusing. I don't think we'll know. I'll ask Jesus when I get to heaven.
All right, we're going to head back to the land of policy.
Uh-oh.
What do you think about Western policy towards Israel and Palestine? Are we being fair or choosing? Are we being fair or choosing religious and political history over what is right? What about the Palestinian people?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert in that field. I will say that I'd say a couple things. Number one of the things that struck me when I was in the Holy Land was the plight of the Palestinians and the destitute conditions in which they live. I was really shocked. Now, I mean, I'd read about it and I'd seen pictures, but I was really unprepared. By the same token, so they are a marginalized and persecuted people. By the same token, Israel, in the middle of the Middle East, they are marginalized and persecuted people as well. You know, so we're dealing with two groups of people that feel marginalized and persecuted, and to a certain extent are marginalized and persecuted. I think one of the things that's missing in this is reconciliation and forgiveness. I really think that is the key that's missing. And the kind of increasing cycle of violence and hatred and war, without reconciliation, nothing's going to change. And I often wonder, and this is an open question, I don't think I'd say this publicly because I'm not an expert, but I don't know enough about Islam or Judaism to know this, but I often wonder if a certain lack of emphasis on forgiveness, as strong as it is in the Christian tradition, is in a sense to blame for this. I don't know, but, you know, frankly, there are Christian nations who are just as bad. I mean, you can point to, you know, Northern Ireland for many years were Protestants versus Catholics, so you can't sort of use that. So it's a very difficult question, and that's probably all I can say about it because I'm not an expert.
All right, well, if you have a few more minutes, we're just going to close with 3 questions about you and your experiences. We'll let you off the hook easy.
Okay.
Okay. In your book, Jesus of Pilgrimage, a great gift for family and friends, you reference a man in a cave who is possessed by a demon. Your reflection on this passage involved, quote, naming your own demons or fears when praying. Can you please elaborate on this?
Can I name my own demons and fears? Yeah, how long do you have?
Perhaps not yours, but as it relates to the person asking the question.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Did you want me to name my own demons and fears?
No, how is it that we can take your passage?
Oh, okay.
I mean, feel free. I mean, we're all friends here.
Yeah, well, you know, here's the thing. We all have demons. You know, I mean, you know, I've been praying a lot about a particular problem that I have lately, I'm directing a young man, two young men who are struggling with particular demons, I would say. And, you know, we all have them, whatever it is. Pride, desire for status, a sort of focus on how we look, how we appear to other people, self-doubt, feeling not enough. I mean, these are all demons, you know, and things that keep us unfree. And what Jesus does, you know, what Jesus does in the Gospels is literally call out these demons. Ask them their names, by the way, very important. The other day I was directing a young man, and I'll keep this vague, but I asked him if he was afraid of a certain thing. He said, yes. I was embarrassed to say it, but now that I say it, it's out. And he was able to see it and name it. That's one reason that Jesus asked the demons their names. You know, name those things. And he really heals, he literally exorcises people who are possessed. But in our own lives, what he does is he calls us to greater and greater freedom. God is always calling us to more and more freedom. You know, and so there's a desire for us to be healed, and that desire comes from God. You know, and so to be able to recognize your demons, name them, bring them out into the sunshine and let God heal them, whether through spiritual direction or the sacrament of reconciliation or just asking forgiveness or trying to change, you know, or therapy, you know, is the way that God kind of heals us. I'm really convinced of that. That's a very important pattern in my own life, and I think it's part of the Christian message. Jesus wants us to be healed, you know, and we want healing. Yeah, and so I think it's a really important dynamic that we need to understand as Christians. Jesus wants to liberate us and free us. He does it in the Gospels whenever he sees people that are enslaved, and he does it to us in different ways. So it's really quite beautiful. And as a spiritual director, I see it all the time. It's very moving. It's very powerful to see it. And it's just, and I'm not talking about just confession. I'm talking about people in their lives who come to name their own demons and their own problems and are freed and healed through grace. It's pretty great.
Okay, we have a question here from somebody who has read your book, This Our Exile.
Wow.
Who was hoping that you would share your favorite Kenya memory with the group tonight.
So I worked for 2 years in East Africa with refugees, which was a beautiful job and probably the best job I ever had. My favorite Kenya experience, well, I mean, there were some funny ones and there were some touching ones. I'll tell you a funny one. The touching ones might take a little too long, but there was a refugee who I worked with, and her name was Khadija. She was a Muslim, and she announced she was going to get baptized. So I was happy, and she said her name was going to be Elizabeth. So I said, great. And then she brought her baby in, and she said, my baby's going to get baptized too. And I said, great. And she was pregnant, that's right. And she said, if my baby's a boy, I'm going to name him James Martin. And I said, great, you know. So she doesn't come into our little shop for 9 months, and she comes back in 9 months, and I kind of forgot about her promise, and she says, "This is James Martin." So that was really cool. And she said, "But now James Martin needs clothes for his baptism. Can you give me money for baptism clothes?" So I didn't have a lot of money, so I gave her what I had. I said, "We take a vow of poverty." And she said, "I also need a place for a reception. So can we use the Jesuit community?" Actually, I haven't thought about this story in years. This is 1993. So we had the baptism. I went to the baptism. You know, I baptized you. I didn't do it. I wasn't ordained yet. So I see the priest. I baptize you, James Martin. You know. And we went back to the Jesuit community. And then the next month, this woman comes in, Irene Mukasa, and she says, I'm pregnant, and if the baby is a boy, I'm going to name him James Martin. So she comes in, and it's a true story. 9 months later, she says, here's James Martin, and baptism clothes. And can you give me money for baptism? So I was telling this story to, and I told this story to another Ugandan refugee named Alice, great woman. And I said, isn't that amazing? You know, it doesn't dawn on me. Oh, Brother Jim, she says, don't you realize that if you keep doing this, every baby in Nairobi will be named James Martin? So there are 3 James Martins running around Nairobi, you know, probably wondering why they're called that strange name. So one of my favorite Kenyan numbers.
Father Jim, there were 6 young adults from the Archdiocese of Chicago who got to travel to Nairobi this summer as part of an immersion trip and had a fabulous experience. And out of gratitude for the warm welcome we've received, 2 of us have set up a giving tree that's been a part of these Theology on Tap nights. We've had people select an ornament with a monetary amount and the supplies it would go for. And this is, I'm stealing a later plug, but I wanted to say a huge thank you to our audience because of our participation from our Theology on Tap participants. We've managed to raise $1,900 for a school in Kenya.
That's a lot of money over there.
It is. We've been able to. It's been able to build 2 new classrooms.
Wow.
Pictures I'll show a little bit later. We've got the walls and a roof, but we're still in need of a few things like windows, paints, and desks. So for those who are present tonight, if you haven't had the opportunity to check it out yet, I encourage you on your way out to stop at the Christmas tree and see some of the pictures of the school and the students and consider giving, even if it's just the spare change in your pocket, every cent counts. So
what's the school?
The school is called St. Clair Umoja. It's located outside of Kitale in western Kenya. It's the hometown of a priest named Father Vincent Shumila, who was our host for the 2 weeks. He's a Capuchin priest who was ever so gracious in carting 6 very outspoken American women around. But the school is in its first 3 years and is right now is 95 students and is just still getting off the ground, but a real bright spot in the lives of these children.
Great work. That's fantastic. I'll say asante sana, which is thank you very much.
Oh yeah, so that was the last word in that question was asante. So
Caribou.
All right,
You're welcome.
Your last question of the night, Father, is what is your favorite Bible story or passage?
Oh, I'd say Lazarus. Well, I don't know. Now I have to like think that. Yeah, there. You know, I think Lazarus. I think Jesus' appearance to Mary Magdalene on Easter Sunday. You know, I would say Lazarus. Though it's so. You know, we were talking about Jesus, how he calls us out of our tombs. It's just so beautiful, and I love that I love that Lazarus is he whom you love. I love that Jesus weeps. I love that the sisters are very real with him, and I love that Jesus just astonishes everybody. And you know, really, the Lazarus story shows that nothing's impossible with God, which is probably a good place to end on.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you.
I want to say thank you to the organizers and thank you to everyone at St. Clement's and Theology on Tap. I mean, I know this is kind of unusual, but I'm happy to be with you. And you know, really, I mean, it's very generous of you. You saved me probably like 3 days of travel, and given the weather, I probably wouldn't have gotten there anyway. So I'm really happy to be with you. Please do keep me in your prayers, though. That's all I ask.
Thank you.
So you are now free to change in your pajama tops and bottoms.
See you guys. God bless you.